Hello folks, I hope that you're having just a great day today. Today we're taking a look at Babel-17, which is written by Samuel R Delany. I've already done one review for you by Samuel R Delany. Now I encountered him in this Dark Matter collection where I did his Nebula winning short story, I and Gamora, which is the first short story that he published. And I did that for you. It was 11 pages in that collection. I enjoyed him as a writer. He was very talented as a writer, even early on. And so I've been pursuing him and picking up some of his other things. I have Empire Star that I have not read yet. It's a novella. It's 90 pages long. I haven't read it yet. I'd like to soon. It's in my queue. But I have also read Babel-17, which is this book right here that was by him. Now Babel-17 has won a Nebula Award for Best Science Fiction Novel. As a reminder, novella awards are given out by the Science Fiction Writers Academy. It's basically the equivalent of the Academy Awards. It's given out by the people who do it. It's not given out by the fans. That's the Hugo. Sometimes the Hugo and the Nebula are in different places, and that just makes sense. You know, if somebody does something experimental in a novel or avant-garde or pushes writing, that may not light a fire with audiences, but on the other hand, it does light a... So it may not be a Hugo winning award, but it does get the recognition. So that's not uncommon. You'll also see them united pretty frequently too. Like for example, Dune won both the first Nebula Award for Best Novel as well as Hugo too. So that does happen. There are, you know, Joe Haldeman's The Forever War did the same. Rendezvous with Rama, Arthur C. Clarke won both. There are a number of novels out there that have won both the Nebula and the Hugo, but this one only won the Nebula. But it was one of the first Nebula Awards because Samuel R Delany is a black writer, and I mentioned this before when I did my first review of him from the Dark Matter collection. He's the first black writer to win a Hugo Award. He won for a short story in '69, and he'll win again for a book in '88. Although by that time would have been the second award by black. Octavia Butler will have won some earlier in the '80s. And she'll be the second black writer who wins a Hugo Award, and the first black woman who wins a Hugo Award for some short stories that she writes in back-to-back years. She wins the Hugo back-to-back in the '80s. But Samuel L Delany, I also did some research. He may be the first gay writer who won, or at least the first openly gay writer who won the Hugo. I'm not sure. There's less literature about gay writers in genre fiction than there are about black writers in genre fiction. It's much easier for me to find with my Google searching who the first black writers were. To win some of these things, those things are much more documented. And of course, obviously, you know, somebody might have won who was openly gay. So based on my research, which is limited, I think he may be the first gay winner of the Hugo, but I might be wrong on that. Anyway, this is Samuel R Delany. He is such a gifted and talented writer. So I read Babel-17, which again was written during the mid-60s, won the Nebula Award. It was one of the first Nebula Awards for Best Novel, and one that was given to him and this is not his first Nebula. He's already won for I and Gamora, which I've reviewed for you. He has another Nebula winning novel, which I've ordered, but I haven't gotten yet from Amazon. I'm still waiting on that, and I do have a couple of other of his works. He also wrote some fantasy works too, which are in my wish list. I haven't ordered them yet. I want to get through some of my other things first, but they're there. But Babel-17, I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't read it like I normally do. I definitely see why it won the Nebula, and I definitely see why it didn't win the Hugo for that reason. Typically when I sit down and I read something, I will just sit down and I will read like chapters and chapters and chapters at a time, right? And I'll just sit down and I'll spend 3 or 4 hours just being absorbed by a novel or something else that I'm reading. I'll read it, you know, a lot of it in these big, long settings. For example, I just read for the first time, and I'm doing a review for this later on, Stranger in a Strange Land. I attempted it when I was in high school. I only got through the first part, which is the first 90 pages of like a 600-page novel, because very little happens in Stranger in a Strange Land. There's very little stuff happening, right? It's all about the philosophy. But very recently, I read it. I went back to it. It was on my bucket list. I knocked it out. I'm going to be reviewing it for you. But I read it this time in 2 days. I spent about 7 hours a day reading it. It took me about 14 hours a day. 7 hours a day during work days. Like I'd come back home, I'd spend 3 or 4 hours reading, right? That's how I normally read. But I didn't read Babel-17 that way. It felt less sit down and read the whole thing in one setting, or two. Now, it's short. It's only about 200 and some odd pages long. It's 219 pages long. I read it across 2 days, but I read it typically one chapter at a time. I would do one chapter, and then I would go do some, and I was done, and then I would go do some other stuff, and then I'd come back and do another chapter, and then I'd be done. And again, although I read it in 2 days, not my normal sort of reading. It doesn't have that sort of absorb you from the beginning to the end like I will typically read things. Now, there are other things that I've read that have been like that too. So to be fair, I do think that there is an avant-garde style of writing. It also struck me as very similar to Philip K. Dick. I think, which I'll give you right now up front. Philip K. Dick will write, and he'll write an entire story in one sitting, and then he'll come back to it, and he'll kind of basically just send it out. By writing in one sitting, he gives this book a kinetic, gives his works a kinetic energy that cannot be captured through a traditional method of writing it. But the problem is that it creates loopholes and plot holes in the story because it wasn't planned as a thing. For example, he has a story about time travel where early on he talks about the science of time travel, and then he violates his own laws that he established for time travel earlier in the novel, later on in the novel. I mean, that's just Philip K. Dick. I mean, you just got to take the good with the bad if you're going to read a Dick story. And that's how he did it. And sometimes he would create these amazing works, and then sometimes he has these works out there that just have these logical inconsistencies in them. And that happens here too. The main character, she changes over time. She develops, and she doesn't change over time. And this is my main criticism of Babel-17, although I do enjoy it. And probably why I would give it an 8 out of 10 instead of like a 10 out of 10. She does change over time, but her changes isn't how she's changing as a character over time, but instead how we're learning different things about our main character over time. And that's, so she starts off as this poet. And she is this great poet. She's the greatest poet of her day. She speaks all these great things to these different people. And she is this heavily established as this great poet. Then she is a linguist that's established in like the second half of the first chapter, and used to work for the Linguist Academy of the military. Now, and she still has all of her credentials, and she's being brought in to interview this Babel-17 project. That is a language that's being used as a code by the enemies, by the alien enemies of the Human Alliance. And then we find out she was also a captain of a military ship too, in addition, and now she's going to go out on another mission to try to find the secret of Babel-17. And so she's literally a captain of a spaceship piloting a mission as a linguist, as a poet, and we'll find out more about her. She's a good fighter, and so forth, and more about her, and not through character development, right? She doesn't do training in the novel or something like that, right? It's just because who she already is as a character. She's in her mid-20s. So my main critique of Babel-17 is that the main character is this incredibly well-crafted character, but we learn more about her as a character not through traditional character development, but just by learning more about who she already was in her past, in her history. So that is, I think, my main issue, my main critique with Babel-17 is that it reminds me of a book that was just written in one setting by a Philip K. Dick and has that issue like a Philip K. Dick will have. But there you are. But again, it's so well written, it's so well crafted. Each chapter will tell many separate stories in it. It has all the crew or various members are represented. It will change point of view from different people, so some other people will see your main female character protagonist from their viewpoints, their vantage points, and I really do enjoy it as a novel. But again, I would tend to just read it like a little bit at a time over the course of a day, rather than sitting down and just knocking out 3 hours of it. So I did read it a little differently, so just to be fair with you, but I did enjoy it, and I'm going to go back and read some other stuff by Samuel R Delany here soon. He's on my queue. I really did enjoy his work and his writing, I and Gamora, from the collection. So what I'll do is I'll link you to this novel below. Have you read it? What did you think about it? Did you agree or disagree with anything in this review? of our female protagonist who's trying to find the solution to Babel-17, which is the code and language of the enemy alien civilization that they're fighting against, and the human alliance and their human allies are fighting against. I'd be happy to talk with you more about it in the comments below. This does have a science fantasy feel at times, because some of the races are like griffins, dragons, humanoid griffins, dragons, and have sort of a fantasy feel to them. So it does have somewhat of a science fantasy feel to it, although it's a little more heavy on the science fiction side than the science fantasy side. But there you are. But I'll go ahead and leave you to it. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. There's going to be so many more reviews of classic works in science fiction like this one, fantasy or horror. And then finally, hey, if you enjoyed this video, please feel free to hit, like I said, feel free to hit the subscribe button. And then finally, if you watch this video all the way to the end, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day and doing so. The fact that you spent your time with me is very humbling, because we all have so many different things happening in our lives and so many different distractions, right? So the fact that you spent that time with me, it's really, really humbling. So I really do appreciate that. Have a great day. Bye-bye.